You know, that makes me mad. To say that Alberta or Saskatchewan are simply oil and gas would be like saying Quebec is only poutine. It shows a shallowness of understanding. I bet that he has probably been to Alberta and Saskatchewan maybe once each in his entire history. He just doesn't care to know anything about the West. Of course, oil and gas is part of the West's story, the same way as fish is part of Newfoundland's story. Absolutely it is. But that's not all it is. The pioneering spirit, the breaking the land for the first time, clearing the land, living in a house made of sod that you yourself cleared from the land, clearing the rocks, farming, and bringing life to the land. That's a culture too, the culture of self-reliance and of mutual reliance. That's a culture too. Very different from a welfare state culture. No need for him to get chippy. I think what happened there is he realized that feelings of independence in Alberta and Saskatchewan and other parts of the West are probably more passionate and more likely to succeed than his own eternal project. I mean, seriously, how many decades in a row do you get to call yourself a revolutionary in the Bloc Québécois before people say, aren't you sort of a permanent fixture? Isn't this sort of a ruse where you play good cop, bad cop with Ottawa, and you make all scary sounds about separatism, and you get all sorts of concessions, but it was all with a nudge and a wink from Ottawa. I think that the reaction by that Bloc Québécois MP was a realization that he's sort of a phony. And when there are more Bloc MPs collecting MPs' pensions than there are in the actual House of Commons, I think that tells you something about the authenticity of their project. I'll get into that later. Let me pause for a second. I just had to say that when I saw that clip. As I said earlier, my name is Ezra Levant. I'm the founder of Rebel News. And Rebel News is a national news source. In fact, we're international. We sometimes tell stories from other countries in the world too. Our motto is telling the other side of the story. And that's what has inspired us to set up a series of town hall meetings. We had one in Edmonton, we had one in Calgary, we're here in Regina, we're gonna have another one in Red Deer. And we have different goals, and let me tell you what some of them are. The first one is to report what the regime media, what the mainstream media, what the bailout media, what the legacy media, what the Mark Carney media will not report. To tell it like it is and let people make up their minds for themselves. To show what is actually happening and let our viewers be the judge, rather than have a Ottawa-generated narrative script emerging from the liberal war room or from the CBC. So in the looming debate over independence, Rebel News will report fairly and accurately on what is happening. And in that way, we're inspired by my first boss in journalism, Ted Byfield, who decades ago set up the Alberta Report and then the Western Report, and he became not just a great journalist, but a place to go to find the news that the big boys were not covering. News of, in that case, the growth of the Reform Party. Now, the Reform Party's motto was "The West wants in." I worked for Preston Manning for a couple of years, and I saw how hard he tried to reform the country from within. And although he tried valiantly, and I'm sure many people in this room helped him, in the end, I think it's not being cruel to say the project was a failure. In the short term, it helped grant 3 majority governments in a row to Jean Chrétien, and in the long term, all the problems that we talked about in the 80s and 90s and 2000s seem to still be here. And, you know, there was a respite when Stephen Harper was Prime Minister. He stopped abusing the West because he was from the West. But the moment he was replaced, Canada went back to its natural state of taking the wealth of the West, but giving, well, an abusiveness. In that Donald Trump clip, Trump has a funny way of talking about Canada and the West. He always says you'll be the cherished 51st state. That's a word he always uses, cherished. And it's sort of funny and it's sort of cheeky, but it makes me think, when was the last time Mark Carney or Jean Chrétien said to the West, "We cherish you." I don't think I've ever heard it. And I wouldn't want the empty words. If I were to hear it, frankly, I wouldn't believe it. I'd say, "Don't tell me you love me, show me you love me." That's more valuable to me. But those clips, there's a little nugget of truth in all of them. So what will Rebel News do? We will report accurately and honestly what we see. And we will not bend the knee to any government paymasters. For one reason, we don't take any money from the government. And I'm pleased that my colleague, Corey Morgan from Western Standard, can say the same thing. The second thing we will do is we will platform people in the movement who do not get any airtime or coverage in the regime media. What do I mean by that? The CBC, the post-media newspapers, the radio stations, they have their favorites. They have their list of people they call all the time, and you're either in the club or you're not in it. But what if you're an insurgent? What if you're an outsider? What if you are a dissident? What if you're someone who wants more radical change? You're not going to be allowed onto their platform, even if you wind up being a genuine newsmaker. President Manning himself suffered from this. He was rarely covered in the early days, and if he was mocked. One of the things that Rebel News will do is to cover the people who are behind the story and let them have their say and let the viewers be the judge. And I guess that goes to the last point. They're all linked, but just to respect the movement, not immediately treat it with disrespect and hatred. And I see too much of that already. Even my old friend, the former Premier of Alberta, I hear the language that he used talking about the truckers in there when he talks about yahoos and fools and grifters. He may disagree with independence-minded people. I'm sure he does. He's always been a nationalist, and he's been a monarchist, and he's been many things looking Eastern. But to disparage people who have a different point of view using the language of the CBC left is something that you will never see in Rebel News, and I know that goes for Western Standard's reporting as well. So that's what Rebel News is doing. We're going to continue to report on this movement. We're going to continue to be a platform from people from different points of view. And we're going to make sure that this time the voice of the people is not drowned out. I also want to do some other things, and I'll get into it a little bit later. I want to learn from other independence movements around the world. I want to learn what went wrong and what went right. I want to learn what resonated with people and what was a dead end. I want to make sure that when it comes to the legal questions or constitutional questions, there's a smart answer to it, and there's a lot of questions to be answered. So that, my friends, is why Rebel News is here in Regina today, and we will continue to travel across the West with our friends to make presentations and answer your questions. Hey, what do you think about Alberta independence? What do you think about Alberta trying to get a better deal within Canada? Do you think Alberta should have the right to vote in a referendum to separate, the same way Quebec did? There's a lot of things to talk about. Can Canada be fixed, or has the West tried that, done that, been there, and it's just not working? Well, we're going to talk about all these things in an amazing day-long conference in Red Deer, the heart of Alberta, on Saturday, June 14th. Go to donegetingscrewed.com to get your tickets now. It's going to be a full day. We'll start with a continental breakfast. We'll have panel discussions. We'll have keynote speakers. We'll even have a debate. I think that's going to be the highlight of it. David Legg, former advisor to the Alberta government, is going to make the case for Canada. Keith Wilson, lawyer, freedom activist, he was with the Freedom Convoy. He'll be making the case for independence. We'll have other people in the debates, a media panel, and people of different points of view, including different political parties. There's going to be a bit of a trade show there too. So we'll serve you 2 meals, but more than that, we'll serve you ideas you just can't get anywhere else. But it's coming up quick, and I promise you this event will sell out. There's only room for 1,000 people. And I know that there have been 1,000-person meetings about this subject all over the province. In fact, we had an event in Calgary that sold out in 2 days when we had only 350 seats. So don't be disappointed. Go to donegetingscrewed.com and get your tickets now. I'll be there. Sheila Gunn Reid will be there. So many interesting people.
Our friends in other media companies like Western Standard, Juno News and Counter Signal. It's going to be a great day. That's Saturday, June 14th in Red Deer, Alberta, all day long. Go to donegettingscrewed.com to get your ticket now. Don't wait. I don't want you to be locked out. It's going to be full. See you there. That's donegettingscrewed.com.
It's going to happen, by the way. The referendum is going to happen in Alberta. Jason Kenney brought in legislation for direct democracy when he was the premier, but it was fake. The level of signatures that you had to get was so high, it was impossible. In fact, I remember first reading those bills and I thought, this is a trick. He thinks we're dumb. Like, for example, to get a constitutional referendum under Jason Kenney's rules, you had to get 20% of the total number of potential voters to sign within 90 days for the constitutional referendum. It's 587,000 signatures. It's impossible. Well, Danielle Smith took that law, which is already passed, and she's adjusting the numbers. So now you only have to get 177,000 signatures, and she's extended the time to 120 days. Can you get 177,000 signatures in Alberta in 120 days? Absolutely. And in fact, there's some groups that are sort of preparing for it by contacting people and signing them up and saying, all right, when we press go, we're going to come to you for this signature. So they're sort of artificially extending the amount of time they have. I think it's going to happen. And then the wording, I've seen the draft wording, it couldn't be more plain and simple, which is, do you want to end being a Canadian province and detach from Canada? It was very plain. There was no trickery involved. And the thing is, this is radical, definitely. Radical means to go to the root. There's nothing more radical. But it's not novel. Quebec has had a referendum twice, and the last time it came within 0.5% of succeeding. And so in a panic, both the federal government passed a law called the Clarity Act, and the Supreme Court of Canada reviewed the rules, and unlike in the United States, which fought a whole civil war over secession, in Canada it is not illegal to secede. It just isn't. In fact, the government has proceduralized it. They've told you how to do it. Simply have a clear result on a clear question. And then, I think de facto you would probably be independent right then. And there would be a negotiation period to haggle over some of the details. But my message to you is, what was once unthinkable is going to happen in 2026. There will be a referendum. And I've seen poll after poll, and support for holding the referendum itself. I'm not saying for voting yes, but just support for holding the referendum is so high already, and there really hasn't been an official campaign. It's just the more people think about it, and I think the more people from Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal disparage it. I think it's sort of a yin and a yang. Both are working, and Danielle Smith is doing it. And she herself has said that she will not be for independence. And I think you can assume that the Conservative Party of Canada will, look at the name there, it's in Canada, that they will be against a separatist vote as well. But that doesn't mean that there aren't hundreds of thousands of people in Alberta who can vote for the Pierre Poilievre Conservative Party of Canada, but also vote in the referendum in a different way. At the very least, to learn from Quebec, you could say it's a good cop, bad cop thing. Or put another way, when you beg and plead Mark Carney to let you sell your oil and gas, just like in another generation when farmers had to beg and plead for the right to sell their wheat without being put in jail. You need an or else at the end of it. Because whether you're Scott Moe or Danielle Smith and you want something, why would Mark Carney care? And I'm not singling him out. It could be any Laurentian elite who gets their majority from Quebec and Ontario. I mean, why would you care about, there's no one less likely to vote Liberal than a Saskatchewan farmer. Why would you care? If there's no or else there, it's just chit-chat. It's just punditry. So I think Danielle Smith is being very strategic by setting up two tracks. She's saying, it's like when Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. Margaret Thatcher launched an aircraft carrier and a little armada, and it was sailing to the Falkland Islands, and she was negotiating in the meantime. But the fact that those ships were sailing sort of put a time limit on the negotiations. She had two tracks going, and that was the or else, and the Argentinians needed to see the or else. Danielle Smith is doing that right now. She's talking and asking and negotiating and compromising and trying to get what she wants. And Scott Moe is doing similar things. But this referendum, which is coming next year, is the or else. And what happens if Alberta says yes? What happens if it actually happens? Will Saskatchewan want to remain in a Canada that doesn't have Alberta? I mean, what are the odds, for example, if you take away 20 or 30 seats for the Conservatives, what are the odds that the Conservative Party will ever be elected again in Canada less Alberta? And there might be some bumpy roads in the early part of it, but once Alberta finds its legs and once it finds some solutions to some problems, would Saskatchewan find a greater affinity of joining up with its next-door neighbor, a province born on the same day in 1905, with similar history, similar culture, simier people? I mean, half of Saskatchewan moved to Alberta during the NDP days. I mean, really the province, as you know, I don't need to tell you this, it was meant to be one giant province called Buffalo. And it was cut in half in part to keep it smaller and weaker. So would Saskatchewan want to stick around in a Canada essentially and permanently dominated by the Laurentian elites, or would it say, you know what, this is sort of exciting? And remember, you don't have to go anywhere. You don't actually have to move your house. You don't have to move anything. All it does is replace certain layers of bureaucracy in Ottawa with a layer of bureaucracy here at home. Now, by the way, it's not going to be utopia. I think of some of the worst things that were done to Alberta and Saskatchewan were actually done by politicians elected by Alberta and Saskatchewan. I think of Rachel Notley in the case of Alberta. She was not a pestilence sent from Ottawa. So it will not be utopia, but there will be certain things that are immediately remedied, that the sensibilities will be more local rather than those of Ottawa. I had some remarks that I shared in Alberta when we had some town halls there, because I started thinking about what's going to happen. Frankly, I was startled when Premier Smith said she was going to hold that referendum. Now, the signatures still have to be gathered and people still have to have the vote, but I truly believe that 177,000 names is doable. Rebel News almost has that many Albertans in our database. I mean, if we can do it, imagine if there was a whole campaign. But remember what they did to the last organic, populist, authentic, sort of leaderless movement to free Canadians? I'm talking about the truckers. I'm talking about Tamara Lich and Chris Barber in France. Remember what they did? They did everything. They did terrible things. They defamed them. They denounced them. They destroyed anyone who stood up. Every part of the establishment was against the truckers. And the character assassination, and not just out in the open, but the trickery. Remember when some liberal affiliated photographer saw a swastika in a hotel in Ottawa? No one else saw it. Certainly no one else photographed it. And what are the odds that it just happened to be the RCMP who were staying at that hotel? But we have proof that the truckers were Nazis. Oh, really? You know, so that kind of black propaganda, the kind of trickery, you'll see that, the false flags. And we saw that in the last federal election when the Liberal Party was making these fake buttons, like fake Trump buttons, and handing them out at a Conservative conference, pretending they were from Pierre Poilievre, so they could say, look at Pierre, he's the mini Trump. I mean, the kind of trickery you've seen, that's just for casual politics. What could be more consequential than Alberta leaving Canada. And I'm not just talking about 13 or 14 trillion dollars worth of oil and gas and minerals and timber and the energy and the entrepreneurialism. Like I say, I think it would be a starter pistol after which other provinces would seriously consider going too. So it's of enormous consequence. You can imagine what they would do to try and stop it. It reminds me a little bit of the Brexit referendum, which was a kind of independence referendum in the United Kingdom about a decade ago. It was pretty bad. The European Union actually had a parliament, still does, in Brussels, and each country sent a number of members of the European Parliament, and they would vote in this parliament in Brussels, Belgium, and those laws would be binding in every country of the European Union. So you're in the UK, and a vote in Brussels by people you don't know. I mean, God bless the Italians and the French and the Germans, they're all wonderful, but if you're British, you don't live in those countries. But they had votes in Brussels that bound people in the UK, and in many cases there were more laws and more rules coming from that faraway parliament. And it was also a symbol for the fact that the UK couldn't control its own borders. So there was a Brexit movement. You probably heard of it. It was led by Nigel Farage, a charismatic speaker, and everyone was against Brexit. All the banks were, all the media were, all the parties, including the Conservative Party, which called the referendum thinking, we'll just call it, it'll lose, and we'll be done talking about this stupid thing. Oh my gosh. And they actually, I'm not making this up, I invite you to check it out for yourself. The establishment named their campaign. They gave their campaign, it was the Leave campaign and the Remain campaign. They gave the Remain campaign a name, Project Fear. And that's exactly what they did. How can we make this as scary and terrifying as possible? Obviously, they denounced everyone who was a Brexiteer as racist, etc. There were so many things to learn from Brexit, including that it's possible to win. I think you're going to see, in this Alberta referendum, you're going to see some trickery. I think you're going to see some people who come in from other provinces as sort of mercenaries. You might even see some people coming in from other provinces who take up residence or claim they do. I wouldn't be surprised if Trudeau brings in a few hundred thousand, Trudeau 2.0 brings in a few 100,000 foreign people. Decide, why not? I mean, again, is there anything more consequential? Not just losing the land and the people and the resources, but losing the psychological impossibility of breaking up Canada. And the taboo could be broken. I mean, remember what they did when Quebec came within 0.5% of leaving. In that case, they didn't come with the stick, they came with the honey, didn't they? They came with the bribes. And that's, I think, so telling. It is cool to be a Quebec separatist. If you're a Quebec separatist, you can rise to any heights in Quebec business. It's essential to be a professor. I'm talking about in French, in French Quebec. It will not hold you back in politics. In the arts and culture, if you're not a separatist, you're not truly Quebecois. And there's something to it, by the way. They do have their language, they do have a culture, and they do have the risk of being watered down to this little island of French in a sea of North America. I get it. I absolutely, totally get it. But whenever Quebec talked about secession or sovereignty association or any of their proposals, they were not met by rage and insults. They were met by, sure, what can we give you? How about, hey, let's make a deal. Let's guarantee you 3 seats on the Supreme Court of Canada, 3 out of 9. Quebec's population is less than 25%, but let's guarantee you 33% of the seats and require that the other 6 judges speak French. Let's make it mandatory for any senior parts of the civil service or even the RCMP. Let's just give so many constitutional powers to Quebec that we don't give to the others. Alberta talks about having an Alberta provincial police force, and it's condemned by all quarters. Quebec has the Sûreté de Québec, Frankly, Ontario has the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police. Isn't it something how Alberta, and I don't think Saskatchewan gets jabbed as much because I don't think the subject of independence comes up quite as much here, or it's not seen as the troublemaker. Alberta's sort of the bad kid in class who's leading the other kids astray. But my point is serious. I have not seen the abuse that is being directed at Premier Smith ever directed at Quebec separatists. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't be so foolish. I think you'll also see foreign meddling, too. And I don't really know what to make of it. I mean, ask yourself, what would OPEC want? Would OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, what would Venezuela, Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, what would they want? Would they want Alberta and perhaps Saskatchewan to secede and become larger oil-producing regions? Danielle Smith has publicly said she'd like to double the production of the oil sands, and Donald Trump says he wants to revive the Keystone XL pipeline, which goes through Saskatchewan. There could be a lot more oil and gas in those two provinces. What do you think Saudi would want? Would they want more oil on the world market or less? I think OPEC and Russia would probably want less oil on the market. They would probably want Alberta and Saskatchewan to stay in a Mark Carney, Stephen Guilbeault Canada, don't you think? How about people who manipulate our politics? I'm talking about the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, all sorts of NGOs that have a point of view on global warming, energy transition, net zero. It all means the same thing. Leave the oil in the ground. And I can't believe that Canada, or Eastern Canada, just voted for Mark Carney, who was on the board of the World Economic Forum, and his chief job outside that was he chaired something called GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero. For 10 years, all he's been talking about is keep the oil in the ground. Except for with Brookfield, the company he ran, which loved oil as long as it wasn't in Canada. So what would those Greenpeace-type political donors want, the Tides Foundation in San Francisco? Again, I think that they would be terrified of a new freedom-oriented, right-wing political entity called Alberta or Alberta and Saskatchewan or Western Canada, whatever it would be called. I think they would hate it. Just a guess on my part. What would China want? I don't know the answer to that one, but China certainly has a habit of interfering in Canadian elections, at least out east. They might want to do something here. What would the United States want? That's a terrifying question for me because I never would have guessed that Donald Trump would have interfered in the Canadian elections in a way that helped put Mark Carney in office. And I still don't understand it. I don't understand how it is America first, how it's in America's interest to have a leader of a country who will weaken us, who will not truly strengthen our country's economy or our military. I just don't get why Donald Trump did what he did. But I actually think that Trump is the one who, with one word, could possibly derail this. But there are many options to becoming an independent country that do not involve joining the United States. I was recently on the hunt for Mark Carney's secret shell companies. I don't know if anyone here saw my videos. I went to the Isle of Man, and I went to Bermuda, a couple of tax havens where Mark Carney has set up fake shell companies to take advantage of tax laws there to hide money from the tax man. And I was trying to track down those shell companies. It was sort of fun. And I learned a tiny bit about the Isle of Man, which is this tiny little island, less than 100,000 people, but they have their own money. It's called the Isle of Man pound, the Manx pound. It's tied to the British pound and the Bermudian dollar. It's sort of fun, but I guess what I'm saying is there are many ways that an independent jurisdiction can be. Yes, you can be the 51st state, or you could be part of a larger commonwealth, as the Isle of Man or Bermuda are. I mean, there's a lot, but that's part of the answers. Those are part of the list of questions that I think have to be answered. If you ask people if they want independence. I think some people love that idea. They love that word, especially when they're chafing up against Ottawa and Mark Carney and the regime media. But then you start getting into technical details. Okay, would you be independent? Would you be a monarchy? Would you be a republic? Would you be a U.S. state? What would happen to the CPP pension? What would happen to the military bases? What would happen to the debt? What dollar would you use? What passport would you use? What stamps would you use? Would you still be part of the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement? Like all of a sudden, oh my gosh, those are a lot of real questions, aren't they? And not, all of a sudden, now you have reasons for people to say, oh no, I'm scared of the alternative. There's a lot of unknowns. It's like on the old-timey maps where they said, here be dragons. I just don't know the answers. I know only bad things are there. When I was younger and I worked in Parliament for Preston Manning as his assistant, I met my counterparts at the Liberal Party and the Bloc Québécois, and I actually became friends with them, if you can believe it, friendships to this day. And my counterpart at the Bloc Québécois, his name was Eric Duhem, he showed me something that they did in Quebec, and let me tell you about it, and I managed to track it down online. Remember in Quebec, they had a provincial party called the Parti Québécois, and they actually formed government. And when they did so, they did a series of consultations, including with experts, to answer all the questions I just listed. Monetary, trade, and so they had scholars, professors, write papers, sort of essays, and they published it. And my friend gave me like this encyclopedia on how to separate that was produced using the resources of the provincial government. Like it wasn't just paid for by the party, and it had the authority and the imprimatur of the government of Quebec. And you could disagree with any particular answer. You could say, well, no, I think the monetary policy should be this, and the trade policy should be that, and I think we should deal with the debt in this way. Okay, fine. You can haggle over all those things. That's life. But the fact that the government started trying to answer those questions showed it was serious, let people think, oh, good, someone's looking into it. Some experts are looking into it. And allayed a lot of those fears of here be dragons, allayed a lot of fears. And it was this one, and you can actually, I managed to find it. I was mentioning, and then after Corey and I were talking about it in one of our Alberta town halls, you can find, the executive summary is available in English. All the detailed submissions are in French, but there's sort of a one volume in English, and it's very well done. And I think that if things start to move down the road, it would behoove those who believe in independence to start answering those questions, because there are a lot of people, I think, in the West who are predisposed to a new way of doing things. But if they started to get into those details, which they would, what would happen to my mortgage? Would my bank still, I don't know. I'm just thinking of all sorts of questions. You could imagine there would be 1,000 questions. And I'm guessing 900 of those questions would have pretty easy answers, but someone has to answer them. And the province of Quebec did so, and I think that all these changes have only come about in the last few months because I think we're all astonished that Mark Carney and the Liberals won again when we had sort of lulled ourselves into believing that Pierre Poilievre would be the Prime Minister and this stuff would go away like it went away under Stephen Harper. It's not going away. And I'm afraid that with the help of the regime media, Mark Carney will have a full 4-year term. I'm really afraid of that. So there is work to do. But I guess other than telling you what Rebel News is going to do about this story, I think my main message to you today is this is actually going to happen. The referendum in Alberta, it's not a fantasy anymore. 177,000 names in 120 days is absolutely doable. So imagine the energy in this story. Imagine the focus on it. And I think that interest in Saskatchewan will grow. And your premier himself may wish to vent some of these ideas and this energy by having a referendum as well. Why do Albertans get asked, but not Saskatchewan folks? I don't know, it's a fair question. Especially if Mark Carney's punitive approach to energy and trade, I don't know if you watched the leaders' debates in the election. Rebel News was kicked out of those, but we fought our way in through the courts. they were all asked, what American products have you given up? How are you boycotting because of the tariffs? Did you watch them? They were all asked, and some of them said, well, strawberries was one answer, and someone said booze. But why wasn't there a question, what Chinese products have you given up because of the canola tariffs? Why wasn't that asked? Because the hosts of the debate don't even know what canola is, don't care. They've heard of Saskatchewan but can't spell it. You know, it's just, they don't care because what's your or else? And this would be my message to Scott Moe, who I think is a pretty good egg. I don't know enough. I'm sure Nadine has has a deep knowledge here, and you all do too. But if Scott Moe is just another guy who can be ignored by the power centers, that's what's going to happen. If Scott Moe had an or else, maybe he would command some attention, like Quebec has done. And why can't that happen? You know, Corey used a line, I don't know if he used it today, so I didn't catch it if you did. Let me say it again. If Saskatchewan was, did you say this? If Saskatchewan was already not in Canada.
I didn't say today.
In his book.
Would you, if Saskatchewan was independent or not a province, would you join Canada now under the terms that you have now? So what is it? Is it inertia then? Is it, oh, well, it's hard? Is it, oh, there's no path? Oh, I don't know how? Or is it the Overton window? I've never thought about it. I didn't think it was possible. I never even contemplated it. It wasn't ever discussed. If Saskatchewan would not join Canada on the terms that it has now, then should Saskatchewan seek a different arrangement? And that's why there was a bit of a different reaction to Donald Trump's indecent proposal. Remember that movie in the 90s, Woody Harrelson and I think, who was it, Demi Moore, I think? And there was an old wealthy man who made an outrageous, indecent proposal to spend a night with a man's wife for $1 million. Outrageous, insulting, indecent proposal, but they contemplated it because they were so poor. Donald Trump made an indecent proposal. He basically proposed to a married woman, didn't he? He said, hey, do you want to hang out with me? Ditch those guys and hang out with me. So if you're a happily married woman and someone proposes to you, that's an insult. It's a grave disrespect, actually. But what if you were just about to get divorced anyways? What if you were on the way out the door? No, I'm serious. And I think that's why that same pitch, join America and be cherished. He probably used the same line when he was dating. I'll cherish you. Donald Trump's indecent proposal felt indecent to the Laurentian elite who said, what? No, we got it all wired here. We got it all set up just sweet. Alberta and Saskatchewan send the equalization east, and we tell them what to do, and it's just set up. What are you talking? Why would we change everything? It's just perfect the way it is. And we don't want to spend on the military because you Americans will do that for us. And yeah, we're going to stick with our dairy quotas because it protects the Quebec dairy and whatever. Oh, I mean, it was indecent to the ears of the Laurentian elites. But if you looked at the polls, that proposal found the most purchase in the West, and especially with young men who just can't get ahead in Canada right now. So these are some of the ways to think about a possible independence. And I was looking at Brexit, and I was looking at some other independence movements. And the slogans of them, I think, were interesting. One thing I learned from Corey, I was watching your YouTube the other day, is don't call it separatist, call it independence. It's a positive word. And I looked at the slogan for the Parti Québécois, the Yes campaign in 1995. You know what their slogan was?
Yes, and it becomes possible. Yes, and it becomes possible, which was inspiring and hopeful, and it's sort of whatever it is that you want to do, you'll be able to do that in an independent Quebec. And they came within 0.5% of winning it. Anyways, I think that Saskatchewan's in a very interesting position. You will not be the tip of the spear. That's Alberta. The Premier has already said that election is coming. But I think that you'll have a ringside seat now, won't you? And I don't think there's a soul in this room who doesn't have friends and family in Alberta. And I'm sure you go to Alberta quite often anyways in the course of your life. What happens to Alberta, it's like twins. Alberta and Saskatchewan were born on the same day. They are twins. Not quite identical twins, but fraternal twins. And I think if Alberta musters the signatures for a campaign, I think it behooves Saskatchewan to have a good think on the subject too. And would this or would this not be a propitious time for your great province to ask in a friendly and neighborly way if Canada would be willing to readjust some of the terms of the marriage to make it more copacetic? And of course the answer is going to be no. But maybe if there's an or else, maybe if Saskatchewan brings in model legislation like Alberta has, maybe Saskatchewan will, for once in the longest time, actually be heard in Ottawa. That's my hope. Thanks for your time today. I want to ask you for a favor. Western Standard, which is my second favorite news source in Canada, I have a tiny bit of paternity over it. I helped choose the name. I don't know if you remember, about 15 or 20 years ago, there was an actual paper version of Western Standard magazine, and I was the publisher, but alas, getting into the paper and Canada Post business wasn't a very good idea, just as the internet was taking off, but it was a labor of love. But Derek Fildebrand and Corey and a team took that lovable brand that actually traced its roots back to Ted Byfield and revived it as an online news source. And I think they're doing just great. Corey, I think you guys are really keeping the spirit alive.
That's great.
But there's only one way that's possible, and that's by not taking money from the government. That is the only way to do it. I can count on one hand's fingers the number of media companies that do not take money from the government. In fact, we once did an access to information request asking what media companies take government subsidies. There were, you might not believe what I'm about to say, but I tell you it's true. There were 1,500 media companies, not just news, 1,500 media companies? I didn't think there's even 1,500 media companies in the whole country. But I think it included like the Costco magazine, and like anyone who printed anything said, we'll take some cash. And Trudeau said, sure. Page after page after page. And there's a lot of problems with that. The main one being, if you are being paid by the person you are doing news coverage about, you can never call it like you see it. You just never can. And what a conflict of interest. When was the last time you saw someone on TV or in a newspaper disclose, when they're doing a story about Mark Carney, that they get paid by Mark Carney? If they get paid by an advertiser, it's marked as an ad. No one would, they wouldn't take $1 million from the Ford Motor Company and do a story about Ford and not disclose that you took ad money. But that is how 99% of the media in this company operate, except for Western Standard, Juno News, and our friend Kean at the Counter Signal, and I'm pretty much almost out of, is there anyone else? Who, sorry?
Brothers, is there anyone else? Like, it's that small. And so we live off the generosity of our viewers, and it keeps us honest. It keeps us attentive. And it's what enabled us to cover the truckers when very few others would. What could they do to us? They couldn't take money away from us because they never gave us the money in the first place. We were demonetized by YouTube, so they couldn't take that away from us either. The only reason Rebel News was able to cover the truckers with candor and honesty is because they had nothing over us. And that, in my view, is true journalism. And they call us citizen journalists, and they call us not real journalists, and they call us fake journalists. We're realer than they are because we're not on the dole. But thank you very much. But that means we do one annoying thing, and that is we send you emails asking for help, and when we have 500 friends in a room, I can't help myself. I learned it from Preston Manning. He used KFC chicken buckets. I asked my friends, I said, Sheila and friends, can you scoot around and can we ask people, you've already paid to be here, so you do not owe me any money, and I thank you for being here, but if you feel like Rebel News and other independent journalists are worth your support, please chip in. My friend Lyndon's down on that end, Sheila's down on this end. And, while we're watching the video, my friends will go around. And again, you've already given, so no pressure. But if you like what we're doing, please chip in. And we've got 33 people on staff we've got to pay for. Well, thanks very much to everybody who chipped in to help us crowdfund our operations. Rebel News turned 10 years old this year, and we've never taken money from the government. When we started out, independent journalism wasn't really a thing. We were one of the first. Now it's a delight to have others like Corey Morgan and the others I've described. I used to have a sort of inferiority complex towards the regime media because I came from there. I worked at Sun News Network when we were on real TV. And then when we moved to YouTube and the internet, I thought, well, I know what I'm doing isn't really real. I mean, I didn't say that, and I didn't really believe that, but I sort of maybe thought that in my darker moments, but I don't really feel that way anymore. I stopped counting our views when we hit 2 billion views of our videos. And now and one of my favorite stories to do every year is when the CBC releases its annual report. Canada's population is growing every year, but CBC's audience is shrinking every year. How's that even possible? 30 years ago, it would not be rare for CBC's The National to have 1 million viewers each night. Now it's less than 250,000, and they don't even publish the numbers. They're so shy about it. So things have come a long way. And my favorite part of it, and this is actually, I'm thinking of the truckers a lot because Tamara is here tonight, but I gave a 1-minute speech to the truckers, and what I said was, you are the media. If you've got a phone, and I know you do, you've got a camera in it. You're a TV journalist. You can set up a Twitter account for free. You got something to say? Say it. Now, not everyone's going to be great, and not everyone's going to do it full time. I don't recommend doing it full time. But the idea that you need to wait for someone else to do a story, or that you need someone else's permission to tell a story, or that your view is not as important or as authoritative as Rosemary Barton, she's some CBC reporter, is wrong. And I love citizen journalism because it breaks open the cartel. And frankly, that's what we're talking about here, about independence. You are supposed to only have a tiny range of choices, all the way from A to B. And if you don't like it, well, if you don't like A, then choose B. If you don't like B, then choose A. The idea of an independence referendum is, as the Quebec motto said, yes, and everything's possible. You're not allowed to think outside the box, but maybe that's going to start happening.